Zelensky announces Putin's victory, a moment that signals not just the conclusion of a grinding conflict, but also the dramatic shift of power and perception on the world stage. The announcement itself, carefully worded yet heavy with implications, reflects the exhaustion of a nation that has endured years of bombardment, displacement, economic collapse, and the brutal reality of a battlefield where human costs outweighed military gains. For months, observers speculated on whether Ukraine's leadership could sustain both its military and political fronts under the unrelenting pressure from Moscow, combined with waning Western enthusiasm for endless support. The declaration confirms that Kyiv has chosen to adapt to the circumstances, acknowledging Russia's ability to dictate terms while trying to salvage what remains of Ukraine's sovereignty and statehood. The path to this announcement was marked by numerous missed opportunities for negotiations, conflicting interests among Ukraine's supposed allies, and the calculated resilience of the Kremlin. Putin's strategy was not merely military. It was economic, diplomatic, and psychological, ensuring that every move forced Kyiv into a corner. Russia leveraged energy supplies, orchestrated back-channel talks with Western capitals, and demonstrated its willingness to escalate militarily if necessary, all while projecting the image that time was on its side. Zelensky, once the face of resistance and hope, gradually found himself managing a deteriorating domestic situation where morale was slipping, territories were contested, and promises of Western integration looked more like illusions than realistic pathways. Announcing Putin's victory does not mean Zelensky personally accepts defeat in moral terms, but rather that he has chosen a language that communicates the inevitable while preparing his people for a transition. The announcement reflects a concession that Russia has achieved its primary objectives: territorial dominance in eastern regions, international recognition of its influence, and the establishment of Ukraine as a buffer rather than a bridge to NATO. Behind closed doors, the decision to phrase the statement in such terms likely came after intense consultations with advisors who warned that prolonging resistance without the necessary foreign support would only deepen Ukraine's losses. For Russia, the announcement is a crowning moment that validates years of strategy, hardship under sanctions, and isolation from the West. Putin can now claim that he has not only preserved Russia's influence, but expanded it at the expense of NATO's credibility. Domestically, this victory narrative will be used to fortify the Kremlin's control, portraying Putin as the man who stood firm against the combined might of the West and prevailed. This narrative is crucial for Russia's internal stability, where propaganda and symbolism are as important as material gains. The psychological blow to Ukraine, however, may prove more lasting than any physical devastation, as the declaration forces citizens to reconcile with the idea that their sacrifices did not lead to the liberation they were promised. Western capitals are caught in a delicate position following Zelensky's announcement. Publicly, leaders will stress the importance of peace, stability, and the end of bloodshed. But privately, many view the outcome as a failure of their collective willpower and strategy. Billions in military aid, weapons transfers, and diplomatic maneuvering have now culminated in a result that cements Moscow's authority rather than weakening it. For Washington, the announcement is particularly embarrassing as it challenges years of rhetoric about supporting Ukraine for as long as it takes. In Europe, divisions are likely to deepen between countries that favored compromise with Russia early on, and those that pushed for a hard line but failed to deliver sustainable results. The announcement, therefore, is not just about Ukraine's capitulation, but also about the credibility crisis that now confronts the entire Western bloc inside Ukraine. Reactions are bound to be divided and emotionally charged. For families of soldiers who died defending their homeland, the announcement feels like betrayal, as though their loved ones fought in vain. For civilians living in war-torn regions, There may be a sense of relief that at least the shelling and displacement might slow, even if it comes under the shadow of Russian authority. The political consequences for Zelensky himself are uncertain. While he will be praised by some as a realist who prevented total collapse, others will condemn him as the man who conceded Ukraine's independence. His legacy, once assured as a wartime leader, is now precarious and will depend largely on whether the post-announcement phase brings stability or further chaos. The geopolitical landscape of Eastern Europe will be permanently altered by this announcement. Neighboring states like Poland, Lithuania, and Latvia will feel vindicated in their fears of Russian expansionism, but simultaneously disillusioned about the reliability of collective Western defense. These nations will likely push even harder for NATO reinforcements, wary that Moscow's success in Ukraine could embolden further moves in contested regions. Meanwhile, countries that advocated neutrality or deeper engagement with Moscow will see the outcome as proof that the West's ability to enforce its will has clear limits. China, too, will interpret Zelensky's announcement as validation of its own approach to challenging Western dominance, reinforcing the perception that persistence and strategic patience can yield victories against seemingly insurmountable odds. On the economic front, Zelensky's acknowledgement of Putin's victory could pave the way for gradual reopening of trade routes, energy flows, and investment negotiations that had been frozen during the conflict. Russia will leverage this moment to reposition itself as an indispensable actor in global markets, offering energy and security arrangements to countries willing to sidestep Western sanctions. Ukraine, however, faces the grim task of reconstruction under limited sovereignty, reliant on both Western aid and Russian concessions, creating a paradoxical dependency on the very state it resisted for so long. The economic suffering of ordinary Ukrainians will continue to shape political debates, with many questioning whether the sacrifices were justified when the outcome appears to have been predetermined. The symbolism of the announcement reverberates far beyond Ukraine and Russia. For smaller nations that look to Kyiv as a symbol of resistance against larger aggressors, the message is sobering. It suggests that despite global attention, sanctions, and weapons transfers, a determined major power can still impose its will through attrition and resolve. The announcement reshapes the narrative of modern conflict, where propaganda, resource endurance, and geopolitical patience matter as much, if not more, than immediate battlefield victories. It reinforces the reality that the international system remains tilted in favor of those with nuclear deterrence and vast resources, undermining faith in institutions designed to uphold sovereignty and territorial integrity. As Zelensky's words circulate across the globe, the responses will be filtered through layers of political agendas, emotional reactions, and strategic calculations. For Ukrainians, it marks the end of one chapter and the uncertain beginning of another. For Russians, it is a triumphant confirmation of resilience and power projection. For the West, it is a bitter lesson in the limits of support and the consequences of strategic hesitation. And for the rest of the world, it becomes a case study in how modern wars conclude, not with decisive peace treaties or complete victories, but with weary acknowledgments of who has outlasted whom